This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
I want to thank you for joining us here on Real Talk. In just a second, Charles Adler, who joins us, of course, the first episode of every single week. We're going to talk about the news that's developing across the country this week. Of course, you probably noticed over the weekend, former Canadian junior team member Alex Formanton has turned himself into London police. He's the first to surrender, to be charged with sexual assault. Of course, this stemming from an alleged group sexual assault that occurred following a team celebration. The 2018 World Junior team, of course, has seen 5 of its players at this point, and who knows, there could be more. But 5 of the players on that team have requested leave from their franchises, 4 of them in the National Hockey League. Alex Formanton was playing over in Europe after the Ottawa Senators a couple of years ago failed to extend him a contract offer. Most people speculate that the Senators had good information that this was coming, that they knew what was happening here. They knew the allegations surrounding Alex Formanton. So we'll see where this story goes from here. Of course, you've got a couple of players, Cal Foote and Michael McLeod from the New Jersey Devils. You've got Carter Hart, the star goaltender, and Alberta boy from the Philadelphia Flyers. And then, of course, Dylan Dubé from the Calgary Flames. We talked about the Calgary Flames release on Dylan Dubé last week, and whether or not the Flames were out of line and deserved to be called out for announcing that their player, Dubé, was taking time away for mental health reasons and that he was in the care of healthcare professionals. And some of you agreed with me that it was a BS move by the Calgary Flames, and some of you have said, well, you guys are maybe getting a little ahead of yourselves here. It is quite possible that it's purely coincidental that Dylan Dubé was a member of that 2018 World Junior team. And it is possible that he is experiencing a mental health challenge and seeking help for something totally unrelated to these charges that the London police are waiting to lay. And I guess in a way, if you really want to stretch and test your imagination, that could be right. But I'm going to stand by my position based on information swirling around the hockey world, and it is just rumors, and he is innocent until proven guilty. But I'm going to ask Charles Adler what he thinks about that statement by the Calgary Flames. We're also expecting Alberta's premier and the Alberta government. We're thinking February 1st, which would be the Thursday of this week. But this week, they've announced that they'll be making public their parental rights policy, which will likely touch on things like pronouns for kids under the age of 18 or 16 or 13 in schools. It will probably touch on things like therapies and surgeries, and will address some of the concerns that some people have. And it'll also, of course, raise the ire of advocates and allies across the country. We've already heard from Rachel Notley, and we'll be bringing you that clip in just a second. And speaking of Rachel Notley, the first name sort of out there to replace her is Sarah Hoffman, Notley's former deputy premier, former health minister, has all but announced that she will be seeking the leadership, having resigned from many of her positions within that caucus. Obviously not resigning as the MLA, but from all of the other positions that may preclude her from seeking that leadership. So there's a lot of ground to cover today, and we're grateful to have you here with us. This episode is happening with the support of Rello, and our friends at Rello have a very clear message for those of you that are sick and tired of the grind. You're on your way into work today. Maybe you're listening to this podcast at work, and they don't appreciate you there. Your income's capped. You don't like the hours you're working. You want to be home with your family, or you want to be out getting some fresh air in your lungs. You want to leave cubicle life behind for good. Alberta, its top real estate school, well, it's Rello. And Rello wants to support you every step of the way, from studying for your exam to getting your license, plus beyond. And 100% of your studies are online, so it's going to be as convenient as it possibly could be. Right now, there's a great offer on the table for Real Talkers that have that promo code locked and loaded, Real Talk. That's all one word. When you go to Rello.ca, you're going to save 20% off any Rello course with the promo code Real Talk. Again, that's Rello.ca. Charles Adler, an Emmy Award-winning talk radio legend and a great friend of this show, joins us the first episode of every week. My man, how was your weekend?
It was excellent, actually. Yours?
Yeah, not too bad. Hosted the Chamber Ball, the Edmonton Chamber Ball over the weekend, which is obviously kind of the gala event of the year in the city. I'd say about 1,100 people in the beautiful Edmonton Convention Center talking business and rubbing shoulders, and always nice to get together with folks like that. And then a beautiful day yesterday out on the outdoor rink skating with the little guy. And so everything is well. All is good when you're out there filling your lungs with fresh air with the kids.
There are so many gears that you have. You're like a Peterbilt. I mean, you can rub shoulders with the glitterati one day, and then of course you're with children and your dogs and the whole. I mean, you've just got the ultimate life. You're a role model for so many of us. You're one of the busiest human beings on earth, but you manage your time so efficiently. I don't know who your time manager role model was in your life, but whoever it was, thank you. Thank you for making Ryan Jesperson into one of the most productive souls in Alberta.
Well, hey, man, we just do what we can to keep our head above water. And I think, for me, it was watching mom and dad and, run a family business and 4 kids. I often say to them, I go, we've got 2 and a couple of dogs. I go, I don't know how you did it with 4 kids. And none of us were shy. And none of us were sort of kept to ourselves. We were all very busy. And so for our parents to have kept the family on the rails and kept all 4 of us out of jail, I always say it was just a marvelous accomplishment.
Would you mind if I said something about my key role model who is alive and well today, thankfully, at the age of 90?
Let's celebrate her, Chuck.
All right. Mom. My mom is my hero in so many ways. She gave me life. That's a biological fact. She also saved my life. That's an historical fact. She also saved the lives of many others. She is a hero. She's my hero. And she is the one who is the real CEO of our family. My father was very strong in a number of ways, but there was no doubt that my mom was the CEO of the family. And when my mom was only 23, there was a revolution, an uprising in Hungary, an opportunity for some people to leave, a tight window of opportunity, but it still took a lot of courage. My father was rather cautious. My mother was rather bold and brash, as she still is. And so she said to my father, look, you put the baby, and that would be me, 2.5-year-old baby. You put the baby in the backpack. I'm going to put the baby in the backpack. And if you don't want to go, I'll put the backpack on myself. And that was a decision that affected them and certainly affected me. And on this day, January 29th, 2024, I want to say happy 90th to my hero, my mom.
Do you still chat with her on a daily, but what's your relationship like present day?
We talk 2 or 3 times a week, and her memory is really, really sharp. She sometimes forgets what she did 10 or 15 minutes ago, but she has no problem remembering what she did 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 and 60 years ago. It amazes me that, she was not just celebrated for her, I guess, her outer beauty. That's a nice way of putting it. She won some beauty contests as a young woman.
Nice.
But it wasn't just about that. She was incredibly talented, and she loved to recite poetry, and there was no teleprompter. She could recite many, many stanzas, and what blows my mind is she still can. The other day she was reciting a poem. It must have been, 700 or 800 words, and there were no ums, no ahs, no pauses. She just downloaded it, and it's just it blows my mind every time I hear her do that.
Yeah, marvelous. What's her name?
Rose.
A very happy birthday to Rose Adler. I love it. I suspect she's not on Twitter or Instagram, or we'd throw it out there, Chuck. So next time you talk to her, you let her know that we're sending our most sincere wishes. Yeah.
Well, I posted a photo, not a really recent photo, not a photo from her youth, and it's a photo. It's about 30 years old, and I posted that with my greeting. And as always, my Twitter thread for some might be rather verbose, but hey, I've got a lot to say about Mom.
Yeah. That's right. And plus, who's going to try to cap Adler? You know what I mean? Like, who's going to try to put a lid on that? I say we let it free flow. One of the reasons why, you and I guess we could have chosen any day of the week that we want to get together and chat. We choose the first day of the week because we can kind of set the table for what is to come. And so you and I will be talking about a few different stories right now. Probably one of the biggest ones that people across the country will be paying attention to is the players from the 2018 Team Canada World Junior Hockey Championship entry that'll be facing charges of sexual assault, extremely serious charges, and an extremely serious alleged incident following a golf tournament type thing. It was an event in the summer that was celebrating the accomplishments of that team and bringing it back together to be recognized. It is following that event that it's alleged that one of those players took a woman back to his hotel room and then over the course of time and without her consent allowed other members of his team to gain access to that room where they allegedly sexually assaulted her for hours. The details of the story are absolutely horrific. And the first player to turn himself into police is a former Ottawa Senator, Alex Formanton. Now, I know that there's only so much we can say about the story right now. None of the other players yet have even been charged. I think anybody with half of a brain and a bit of common sense can put two and two together and figure out who the other four will be. But until they turn themselves in, we don't know for sure. This is a tough one for Canadians, number one, because you feel for the survivor in this case. It's obviously a terrible circumstance. And it's also a huge stain on a brand that many Canadians feel a great connection to. That is that Hockey Canada logo in the World Junior Tournament. It's a holiday. It's a Boxing Day tradition for millions of people. How are you approaching the story? How are you wrapping your mind around it? How much time are you spending thinking about it at this point?
It's not complicated for me at all, and it goes right back to my mom, who faced the worst kinds of tyranny, brutality, authoritarianism, and yes, rape. You name it. I mean, she had to confront all of that. She was just a child, and so she's always taught me that the number one thing that matters is character, not talent, not creativity, not how many pucks you can put in the net, but your character. And while I have said on this show before that, some of the hockey teams that are really good at are the guys who, bring on the bad boys and are able to reform them. There's a limit to that. By bad, I'm not talking about rapist. I'm not talking about sexual assault. I'm not talking about criminal. So to me, this isn't complicated at all. Any team, whether it's the Flames or any other team that wants to make excuses for criminal behavior, for bringing on people who are not yet indicted, but being investigated for crimes. I'm not there. Are people presumed innocent until they're proven guilty? Of course they are. I abide by all the laws, and I support the laws of this country and most Western democracies for that matter. But this one isn't complicated for me. If a person has participated in this kind of activity and it's proved in a court of law, then I'm not interested in having them on my team. I'm not interested in supporting them. But I'm also not interested in saying that this is hockey culture. That's the only part of this story that bothers me. The idea that everybody that is a parent of, a coach of, a manager of, a supplier for, or a player themselves, the idea that this is emblematic of hockey culture is not something I'm ever going to buy into.
I think it's a good wake-up call for parents and for coaches and for members of the general public, for people that are involved in any sport or any structured organization. I think that obviously we need to evolve our learning in these types of things. I was talking to a friend over the weekend. She was telling me about an interesting scenario that she found herself in at a sporting event with her nephew. And she went and she took, like, as any proud auntie would, she took a picture of her nephew and his teammates. And it occurred to her to ask him if she could post it. She said, "Do you mind if I post this photo?" And he said, "Well, did you ask the other kids for their consent?" And she was kind of taken aback as she told me the story. She said, and she kind of went, "Huh." Because, she hadn't asked for their consent. It wasn't something that had occurred to her. But it was like this younger generation has maybe a better understanding or an earlier understanding of what that's all about. And that consent, by the way, we're going to be talking about parents' rights and stuff like that with you and later this week and in the weeks to come, of course. And we'll be debating and discussing some things. But I think we can all agree that the word consent doesn't specifically and exclusively apply to sexual intercourse. And when we see in curriculum, for example, in sex education, that kids are learning about consent in elementary school, we understand it applies in many different situations, but having a child and then a young adult, a tween and then a teen and then an adult, understand that premise early will benefit them and benefit everybody later on in life. And you got to lay that groundwork early. So I'm happy to see that it's happening.
Yeah, no, I mean, the consent piece is a very large piece. I didn't, grow up with a whole bunch of rules and regulations about consent. I simply grew up with admonitions, commandments, if you will, from my mom and dad to never involve myself in any situation, whether it's sexual or any other situation, where the two sides don't agree to terms. It was egalitarianism. Sometimes I say I'm hopelessly egalitarian. Well, that's where I got it from. And I think if today we need to teach people the importance of consent in any way, shape, or form, I'm all for that, because all of this involves one simple fact of life. We respect each other as human beings, whether we're playing hockey or doing podcasting or doing truck driving, whatever class we're from, whatever race, whatever gender, whatever orientation, we are all equal, and everyone is worthy of treatment of equality by the law and by society, and certainly everyone is worthy of respect, and that's what consent is coming from. I'm sorry if I'm moralizing a little bit too much there, but I'm thinking about my mom today and everything she taught me, and everything you're talking about, Ryan, is extremely important to her.
Let me ask you for your thoughts, and you tell me. I mean, you say what you think on this show. There's no doubt about that. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. So I don't know if you and I will see eye to eye on what the Calgary Flames pulled last week. I'm sure you saw this release, but they were the only ones to cite mental health when announcing that their player was taking leave. They say Dylan Dubé has been granted an indefinite leave of absence for mental health reasons, and they go on to talk about how he's in the care of healthcare professionals. He's in the care of mental health professionals. We talked about it with Dustin Nielsen, sports broadcaster with Edmonton Sports Talk here last week. I knew that I threw Dusty a fast one, high and inside, because a lot of people go, I don't really want to comment on this yet. Dubé's not been charged by police. We don't know for sure that he's one of those 5 players. He was on the team. Where do you land on it? If it is indeed mental health and it's totally unrelated to this case, I've already said I'll issue an apology and make a donation to a mental health charity, but I don't think so. Sure. Are the Calgary Flames out of line with invoking mental health in notifying their fans that Dubé would be taking leave?
Yeah, they're putting PR ahead of community here, and deceiving the community is not service to the community. If they don't believe that there's something larger in life than their team, than their standings and their public relations, then they've got a problem. I think they're trespassing. I don't know who came up with the decision to do that, but it's not wise. And once again, I'll say this: sometimes Albertans are treated as rubes and hillbillies. It bothers the hell out of me. They're not rubes and hillbillies. They're educated people. And by educated, I don't care how many years of post-secondary you have. That's not my point at all. But they are very in touch with what this kind of stuff is all about, and it's insulting to their intelligence. And so I'm sorry on this one, Ryan. We're not going to disagree. We're on the same page on this thing.
I want to ask you, and we don't know what the United Conservatives' parental rights policy is going to look like. They're obviously expected to lay it out for the public this week. I'm expecting it probably on Thursday, if our sources are correct. I'm not going to get too into it because nobody's seen it yet. My understanding is that it will require a parent's consent for a student, for a young person that wants to change the pronouns that they're using, if they're in school in particular before the age of 16. So any child 16 years of age or under the age of 16 will require a parent's consent. There's going to be some age limitations, I believe, on things like hormone therapies and on top surgeries, I believe. And I've got my own thoughts on that in just a second. It is expected that this policy announced by Alberta this week will go further than the policies that had the legislation that's already been introduced first in New Brunswick by Premier Higgs' government and then in Saskatchewan by Premier Moe's government. So the now leader of the official opposition, Rachel Notley, until she's replaced in that leadership race, has issued a statement. We'll play that. We'll see what Rachel says right now, and then we'll see what Charles Adler has to say about it. So here's Rachel Notley getting ahead of this week's announcement.
Literally hundreds of thousands of Albertans woke up this morning to discover that the Premier sat beside somebody who claimed that immigrants diluted the Canadian culture, who of course has made a number of homophobic, transphobic, discriminatory comments. I'm here today to say that that is not okay, and that this doesn't reflect who we are as Albertans. And our Premier is deeply out of touch with the mainstream views of Albertans, and I want those folks to feel safe and secure in this province. And I want those folks who are thinking about coming to this province to know that it is actually a place for them.
So that's Rachel Notley setting the table for what I know is going to be contentious and combustible debate and discussion this week. What are you expecting?
Specifics of the bill will be, but I think Rachel Notley is referring to the night that Danielle Smith shared on that stage with Tucker Carlson, and I totally get a number of things about that night, things that you have said eloquently last week. Tucker Carlson is a great entertainer. He knows his audience. He knew what to tell them, but there's no doubt that, the jokes, especially the jokes that were, I have to call it what it is, jokes that were homophobic jokes, calling Trudeau a cross-dresser and saying that it's kind of officially the laws and it's a government law that people who come out of the closet are to be celebrated unless they're the prime minister, all that kind of stuff, which brought the house down. Danielle Smith wasn't going to call it out. We knew she wasn't going to call it out. We talked about it before it happened. She wanted to embrace that group. That's a crowd that she has an opportunity of ingratiating herself to, and she did. She got a lot of applause, so it was a very happy house, happy with all of that stuff. But if that's what you're going to be doing, and if that's what you're associated with, then it's no wonder that Rachel Notley and other people who have been fighting for LGBT rights and trans rights for a number of years, it's no wonder they're going to be suspicious of any legislation that you're going to be bringing in that intersects with those issues.
The Alberta Teachers Association releasing, just by way of Twitter a short time ago, they say that, Premier Smith says the government will be releasing policy on parental rights this week. She says they've consulted broadly on these issues, but so far the ATA, the Alberta Teachers Association, has not had any conversations about this with the Premier or any government officials. They say broad consultation on policies affecting the operation of schools must include the teaching profession. Obviously, when government doesn't consult with big groups, there's going to be issues. You know that the government is being influenced by some parents, those that are championing the so-called parental rights movement. What you're going to hear a lot of people talking about this week is that confluence of where parents' rights stop and where a child's rights begin, right? And this is one where I think not everybody agrees, right? Like you're not all of a sudden, you don't have rights bestowed upon you at the age of 16 or the age of 18. And I think that that's where a lot of people are going to get hung up on that debate right now, because when you start pitting the parents against the teachers, right, as if the teachers have some sort of nefarious plan or have some, objective or some ideal outcome that is different than what the parents would want, then you're pitting two groups against one another. When you start talking about parents' rights, though, you got to have the conversation about children's rights as well. And I think that that's where a lot of the conversation is going to be going over the next few days and weeks.
Look, I know a lot of teachers. You know a lot of teachers. I think your mom was a teacher. I think all of us have teachers in the family somewhere, whether it's our mom. I mean, my mom wasn't formally a teacher, but, I was talking about her earlier as a teacher because that's what she was for all intents and purposes. To me, she was the best teacher I ever had. I don't know of any teachers, Ryan, maybe you've met one or two. I don't know of any teachers who get out of bed in the morning and the first thing on their mind is trying to convince Johnny or Janie to change their orientation or to have surgery. I find the concept of, promoting this idea that teachers do have, and I'll use your word, the teachers have some sort of nefarious plan, whether it's the teachers union or individual teachers, to, mess with children and to influence them to think of themselves as other than, what they appear to be. The idea that this is what's on teachers' minds as they try to make sure that Johnny and Janie, get English and math and everything else that they're teaching in schools these days. Once again, not to dwell on the Tucker Carlson thing, but all of us have had the opportunity in our lives as broadcasters and podcasters to turn people who are into our opponents, to turn them into enemies. So if you're conservative and your opponent is a liberal, yes, you can talk about your opponent in many ways. But once you get to the point where you're treating them like the enemy, they're the enemy of the state, they're your enemy. And once we get to a point in this province of Alberta or anywhere else in Canada of treating the teachers union or teachers themselves as enemies of families, enemies of children, I tend to check out. It's just, David Parker is not my cup of tea.
We've got comments on here. I mean, I'll just go to the live chat. By the way, I like this comment from Sylvia, who says, as someone has said before, children have rights and parents have responsibilities, which I think is good. Mark says David Parker, founder of Take Back Alberta, has tweeted that he will break the teachers union over his knee. Says he must be a really strong and powerful guy. That from Mark. Galaxy Hunter says removing human rights of minors is used as a distraction, avoiding issues around healthcare, education, and land management. Tracy says teachers are already exhausted. Now they have this to deal with. Lauren says no wonder this topic will surely trigger some emotions. Sharon says teachers are on the front line with absolutely everything. Different Tracy's here. Tracy D says the minute that David Parker has anything to do with schools, every teacher in the province will walk. I guarantee it. I don't know about that, but you could see an interesting, that's an interesting angle. Wouldn't it be strike action? Tracy C says children are not chattels or laborers. They're younger humans that deserve rights and freedoms. Yes, we as parents guide them, but so do teachers, doctors, religious figures, and others. Obviously everybody's got a lot to say about this. Can we agree? Probably, it's one thing you talk about pronouns and what your policy is going to be on pronouns and when parents should be advised and when it's really none of a parent's business. And you'll hear allies and advocates, and we'll hear a lot. People will hear it on this show coming up this week, and we're going to talk to a bunch of different people, and not everybody's going to like the opinions of every single person that we talk to, because that's kind of how it goes when you're hearing different perspectives.
Show's called Real Talk.
Real Talk, but you're going to hear people say that this is why it's important for parents to be part of this, and then you're going to hear other people saying some kids just aren't safe when their parents are notified, and that's a very compelling and important point to consider, and we'll hear that. When you start getting into things like hormone therapy, when you start getting into things like surgeries, and I wish that people on the podcast listening to this could see your face just twisted when I said that. But I'm going to say I think it's less controversial. As a matter of fact, I'm going to forecast that some of the inclusions in this legislation are probably going to be supported by the majority of people, even if those people don't want to go on the record and say it, even if those people aren't tweeting it from their accounts or taking that position with the neighbors or the kids or the friends of theirs at the hockey rink. I don't think it's as controversial as some people would have you believe. I think most people believe that stuff should be approached with a little bit more caution. What do you think?
Well, my face was contorting when it came to surgeries, because I don't believe that teachers are advocating I use Johnny, Janie, Muhammad, whatever. I don't want to get into this whole business of, how diverse my language is. I learned my language when I learned my language, and I think in terms of Johnny and Janie. And I just don't believe, I've not had any parent give me, I've had parents, send me all kinds of stuff and tell me about all kinds of stuff anecdotally, blah, 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 blah. But I've never seen a stitch of evidence that a teacher anywhere in this country told a young person to think seriously about having surgery to transgender. I just don't believe that 12-year-olds are being told that you're a boy in the you've got a boy's body, but you've got a mind of a woman, and that surgery is something you should seriously consider. I have no evidence that teachers are doing that.
Yeah, and I don't even know that it has anything to do with teachers. I mean, and we haven't seen the legislation yet, so let me be clear on that.
Right.
But I have good reason to believe that it will include some limitations on when young people can start to transition, when young people can start to utilize those therapies, when especially when surgeries can occur. And I see somebody here on our, Michelle is listening and says in our live chat, Ryan's letting his right-wing tendencies show. I don't think it's right-wing to wonder if you should have young people under the age of 16 or under the age of 18 undergoing gender transition or gender reassignment surgery. If that's right wing, to wonder if maybe we should pump the brakes on that or be a little bit more prudent with that, that's fine. I'll own that one. This is an opinion that I have. And someone may say, well, what do you know about what it's like for a trans person? Or what do you know what it's like? I don't know. And we're going to talk to a lot of people, and we have talked to a lot of people. But I know what my gut tells me about where most people are in their development at 12, 13, 14, 15. And I would suspect that significant personal transformation by way of surgery or therapies, is something that the average person in society, the average person is probably going to go, I don't think it's too unreasonable to put an age limit on this. And I would suspect that that'll probably be when we see the legislation and better understand it, and we'll go through it line by line when we can see it, that's going to be the part that the fewest people are going to push back on.
Keeping this as real as possible. Your dad is a doctor. If a 12-year-old said to your dad, the doctor, I want hormone therapy because I want to transition because I'm a boy, but I really believe that I'm a woman. I'm about to become an adult woman in a few years, and I want hormone. What would Daddy Jesperson say to a 12-year-old?
I mean, I can't speak for him. I don't know. But like I know like, for example, here, like Lefty Lance. I mean, at least Lance and his handle lets us know where he is on the spectrum there. So there you go. He's a lefty. That's fine. We love our lefties. We love our righties. We love everybody that meets here in the middle on Real Talk. But Lefty Lance says, Ryan, do you know the process these kids go through before they get to the point of surgery? Just listen to the question. Like, kids and surgery. I'm just saying. And maybe my opinion would be different if I had a trans child, and we're going to talk to lots of people, and we have. And the track record of the show and in the history of the show, we've talked to lots of people from all walks of life. But when you're talking about kids, and when you're talking about like preteens and teens having major surgeries, all I'm saying is that the general public, if you poll the general public on this kind of stuff, and we've seen it, you'll see that it's like 80+%. It's like 85+% of members of the general public are going, I support prudence here. I support pumping the brakes. I support putting in limits, like age limits, when people can receive these types of medical interventions or medical therapies. And that's like, for some people, they're going to think that that's nuts, but that's not what the general public thinks.
I'm with the general public, and I make no apologies for it. And people want to say, well, that's my right-wing tendencies. I probably have right-wing tendencies. I probably have right-wing tendencies. I probably have left-wing tendencies. I have general public tendencies, no matter what the, F-wads, I'll just say F-wads because I don't want to use the F word. No matter what the F-wads in the far right want to say about me, call me a communist and, whatever they want to call me because I'm not a UCP supporter. I'm none of those stupid things, okay? I'm the same person I've always been. I'm a traditional person. And no, I'm not interested in 12-year-olds having a hormone therapy and surgery. And for those people who say that's not a progressive enough position, fine. I don't have a progressive position on that. I can live with it.
Yeah, people are saying I need to get my facts straight before I host this conversation. There's nothing factually that we're wrong on here. I'm just telling you what the legislation is going to say this week, and I'm forecasting what the public's going to think about it. That's it. That's all we're talking about, is that here's what the government is going to say that parents got to be notified about, and here's the age where parents don't have to be notified anymore, and here's the age limits where all this stuff can happen in Alberta. They're basically just drawing lines. They're painting lines. And that's what it's going to be. And I'm just forecasting right now. I'm not talking about what surgeries are happening, where and to whom. I'm just saying this is what the government's going to say, and this is probably what the public's going to say. And I don't think, when they say that Alberta's legislation will go further than New Brunswick's or Saskatchewan's, and you see the pushback. Like, obviously, there was sort of the country, like New Brunswick was first, right? So everyone was kind of going, ooh, and kind of looking at this. And Blaine Higgs, the Conservative premier there, who's not known as like a right-wing nut job. He's not. He's pretty well respected. And some of the more progressive Conservatives had a real and still have a real problem with it, and they didn't like it. But then Saskatchewan was like, hold my beer. And then Saskatchewan went a little further, and you saw the progressives in Saskatchewan get really upset about it, and they still are. I'm just always curious to see how it's going to fly in Alberta. And obviously you're going to see pushback. Obviously there's a significant element of this population that'll push back on whatever this government does just because it's this government. But I also think that some of the elements of this, and this is the point I'm making, will not be seen as controversial as some people might think by the general public.
May I say something to my progressive friends who are listening and watching? If you want right-wing nut jobs to absolutely prevail, to win for the next decade or 2 or 3, if you want right-wing nut jobs to have more power in Alberta and Canada, all you have to do is lay down the lumber of what I'll call progressive fundamentalism. I don't like the woke word. I just don't like the word. But all you have to do is be really fundamentalist about your progressive values and try to enforce them by calling everyone who disagrees with you a right-wing nut job. You want to do that, and mainstream people, whether they think of themselves as conservative, liberal, whatever, mainstream people will go against you. You'll marginalize yourself, and you will give the right-wing nut jobs all of the power that you're worried about. You cannot sell your values by simply calling every single person who disagrees with you an extremist or right-wing nut job. That only will marginalize you. And you can feel good having a cause, but you'll never have any real power. They will have. Your opponents will have all the power.
Totally agree. We're talking to Charles Adler. Hang tight. In just a second, I want to ask you if you think that Canada's making the right move, pausing funding to a United Nations organization. Charles joining us every Monday, and those conversations happen with the support of Real Talk partners like our friends at Friesen Brothers, who want to remind you that February 1st is coming up. February 1st is coming up in just a few days, and that means that it's another opportunity for you to knock 15% off of every grocery purchase of $75 or more. And that's in addition to their seniors discount days. For details on that, you can just check out their website, friesen.com, or you can visit them in store. 16 different locations across the province of Alberta. Friesen Brothers is Alberta grown and Alberta owned. Our friends at Eden Landscaping want to remind you to look back this summer. And when you start thinking about the stories that you saw covered in the news, what were they? Well, they were stories of climate change. They were stories of the impact of climate changing, weather patterns reflecting that, drought, flood, wildfire. Well, what about how people's landscaping's coming along? What does that have to do with anything? Obviously, there are major implications when it comes to the types of plants that you're going to want in your yard, the resilience you're going to want from your yard, the use of water in your yard. These are the types of things that the team at Eden Landscaping is thinking about as they're drafting up plans for this coming summer's projects. It's why you want to trust the experts like Eden Landscaping with more than 20 years of experience and many return customers. That's what they're so very proud of. You can get that conversation started by visiting them online at landscapeedmonton.ca. If you're thinking of maybe heading back to school right now, you're intrigued by new opportunities in the job market, but you know you got to level up your education first. Why not take a second to check out Athabasca University online? They're world-class accredited online degrees and courses designed so you can complete your education wherever and whenever it works for you. It's easy to get started at athabascau.ca. You can learn more about the AU Advantage, including accreditation, credit transfers, and, hey, maybe some of the financial resources they have. There's all kinds of opportunities for people in all kinds of different circumstances. That's kind of the whole point. It's one of the benefits of Athabasca University. And speaking of this past summer, and of course we know that those weather events aren't just limited to those warm months. We've of course seen extreme cold temperatures over the past few weeks that created a real mess for some folks as well. Is it your business maybe that we're talking about, or heaven forbid, your basement, burst pipes and the like? Complete Care Restoration are experts in mitigating and, in when necessary, repairing fire damage, flood damage. They're experts in getting rid of black mold, in getting rid of all of the other types of things that can be real headaches and hassles. Asbestos, anybody? You ever opened up a wall and what you thought was going to be a tiny little reno and realized it's going to be a little bit bigger than tiny? That's when you're going to want to get in touch with Complete Care Restoration. You can find them under the sponsors tab on our website. Canada has joined a group of nations, including the United States, Britain, and others, of pausing financial support for a United Nations organization that's providing assistance in Gaza. This is the UNRWA, which is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Conservative leader in Canada, Pierre Poilievre, accusing them of being a terrorist organization. And this Canada's International Development Minister, Ahmed Hussein, over the weekend expressing, by way of a statement, alarm at the allegation, says that Canada will pause its funding after it's been suggested by Israel that members of the UNRWA staff took part in the October 7th attacks by Hamas-led militants in southern Israel that killed about 1,200 people. This is a supercharged story, Charles. This is obviously a situation that continues, this Israel-Hamas war, though it doesn't lead the headlines every single day. It is still very real. It is still very troubling. What do you make of this recent development over the weekend? And is Canada, do you think, making the right move in pausing funding?
I think Canada is making the right move. The EU this morning also decided to pause all funding. Iceland and many other countries that are not considered friends of Israel in general, and certainly not friends of this right-wing Netanyahu government in Israel, they're pausing funding because it has nothing to do with Netanyahu, and it has nothing to do with anything other than proof that the United Nations now has, and the United Nations has fired several of these people, proof that it has that some members, I keep having to say this, some UNRWA members, this is the United Nations Relief Agency, some of them aren't just supportive of Hamas, but some actually participated in the October 7th massacre. It's very, very difficult to support any agency that abides by that. And of course, if one goes into the history, there's nothing new here. Various members, and I say various, not all, various members of this same agency have over the years participated in all sorts of, and I'll use Ryan's words here, nefarious activities with respect to supporting terror, with respect to supporting Hamas, and with teaching anti-Semitism. That's the deal. None of this has anything to do with ceasefires, the war itself. This has to do with terrorism. It has to do with criminal behavior. It has to do with specific behavior exhibited by some members of the agency. But just to basically exclaim why I say some, Israel itself, whatever you may think of Israeli policies, Israel itself trusts many members of the UNRWA right now to feed as many Palestinians as possible, clearly displaced by the war in Gaza. So if Israel itself at the moment is trusting most members of the UNRWA to help feed these people who are absolutely destitute and desperate, then it just, I think, dots the I and crosses the T on why I'm saying some members of the UNRWA.
Before we let you go, and I didn't tell you I was going to read this because I want the element of, not surprise, but I want to get your legitimate reaction to an email that we got from Richard, okay? And so Richard submitted this to be featured as a flamethrower submission. You know, on Fridays, our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park present the flamethrower. But we did an all Tucker Carlson edition of the flamethrower this past Friday, and this didn't qualify. So I had to apologize to Richard. And then I thought, well, it's about you and me. So I thought, well, I'll just read it to you, and we can have some fun with it. And I'll let you know before we get to it, because he's deploying explosives. I mean, he's really putting you can hold someone's feet to the fire, and then you can put someone's feet right in the fire, and that's what he does here with us. But he does sign off XOXO, so it's all in love. This from Richard.
We can handle it.
I know we can handle it, and this is for the pure entertainment of the audience, Chuck. So here you go, and I want to watch you hear this. So he says, Jespo, I voted for the federal Liberals in 9 of the past 10 federal elections. So he wants us to let us know where his past performance has been. Okay, Chuck? He says, I did vote Conservative in the last federal election. He says, I've been blessed with great MPs like Anne McClellan, known around here as Landslide Annie, and Randy Boissonneau. He says, I also love Real Talk, and I do not miss an episode. And then he says, but he says, your skit with Charles Adler. And so now he's talking about January 22nd. Okay, so he's talking about a week ago. You're in my skit. He said was just embarrassing. He says, Ryan, you start by pointing out the obvious fact that the federal Liberals are floundering, to say the least. And I actually thought that we were finally going to hear a good conversation about out-of-control deficits and a 40% increase in the size of the public sector and spending billions on outside consultants because our bloated bureaucracy has none of the required skill set to govern, the botched carbon tax, regardless of whether or not it's good policy, pouring gasoline on inflation, disastrous housing and immigration policies, and making Canada the constant punchline in the international comedy scene, and Justin Trudeau single-handedly normalizing political scandal. He says, I'm old. Can I see Chuck? I want to watch him laugh while he listens to this. He says, I'm old enough to remember when a $16 glass of orange juice was a major political scandal. But now blackface and the We Charity and the Green Fund and SNC Lavalin and many others are mere sound bites in a lightning-fast media cycle. And instead of highlighting why the Liberals are self-destructing, you and Chuck, and I wrote him back to say, why are you dragging me into this? I said, you can't pass up a chance to throw shade on the UCP and read live stream comments like, oh, you think Canada's bad? You should see how bad Alberta is, thanks to Danielle Smith. And when the conversation accidentally slipped even close to criticizing the Liberals, then you guys artfully pivot to discussing the Oilers? Says Richard, you guys are better than that. And then he says, by the way, you did the same thing on January 9th. He does a great job letting the audience know what episodes they should go back and listen to. He says, January 9th, when we got to listen to you cooing over Supriya Dwivedi as she blamed the Liberal self-destruction and fewer women getting into politics on online misinformation in the problematic conspiracy theory adjacent world that many Conservative MPs frequent. Her words, says Richard. Maybe what happened to Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott is relevant. No, the Liberal machine, including the media, just refuses to do the tough but necessary self-reflection. Closes Richard. Next time, instead of pivoting to the UCP or the Oilers, how about you recognize that voters are seeing through the smoke screen of political and policy blunders that patronizing Liberal propagandists like Charles Adler, Max Fawcett, and Supriya Dwivedi are too stubborn or proud to acknowledge. Be better. Don't be afraid to criticize the Liberals. It will help them in the long run. That from Richard, who voted federal Liberal in 9 out of the last 10 federal elections. Oh. Over to you, Titan. I've been sitting on this thing for a week.
I chat with Ryan every Monday. I feel blessed to have the opportunity. It's real talk, like any conversation, the kitchen table or anywhere else. It swerves in and out. It goes down, various alleyways. Sometimes it goes into the ditch, and that's what real talk is all about. So, if real talk should be about me doing a defense of the Liberals as if they're on the stand and I'm their defense lawyer. I'm not the defense lawyer for the Liberals, and I'm not one who says that the Liberals haven't made mistakes. I'm not one that says these scandals aren't really scandals. I've never once said anything like that. Do I bring up some stuff on the other side? from the conservatives, some of the stuff that they traffic in on the web, some of the disinformation they traffic in? Of course I do. Do I extol the virtues of Canada? And do I say that I just don't buy into this idea that Canada is broken? It's not, in my opinion, a balanced approach to criticizing the government. This country is not broken. This country has never been broken. This country will never be broken. And this country is about so much more than the UCP and the CBC and the CPC and the LPC and Ryan and Chuck. It's about 40 million people, most of whom are wonderful people, most of whom have one thing in common. They support and love this country. And you want to know when you see that? It doesn't matter whether it's an Oilers game, a Flames game, a Leafs game, down east, out west, whatever. When the troops show up at the game, everybody salutes them. Everybody honors them. And yes, some of us, because of our own personal history, some of us give 100% credit for those troops, for our own existence, our own lives. We shed a tear or two. And I'm not embarrassed to say I shed more than 1 or 2 tears every time I see Canadian forces in any of our hockey arenas or football stadiums. We cannot honor these people enough. Yes, I love my country, and I'm not embarrassed to say that to the person who wrote this letter or anybody else who's watching or listening. I love Canada, and I make no apologies for it.
You can find Charles Adler on Twitter, at Charles Adler. You can find him every Monday or the first episode of every week right here only on Real Talk. It's great to see your face, pal. We love you.
Great to see you.
And a very happy 90th to Rose Adler. We love that. I saw in the chat as well, Justin. It was his birthday yesterday. It's his grandma's birthday today. So shout out and a happy birthday to Justin and to his grandma. He went on to say, by the way, did Justin in the chat, the parental rights legislation proves that David Parker and Take Back Alberta have a very outsized influence on the Premier's office. I do think it's interesting timing bringing this in right now. I don't think that the average Albertan is demanding that the province get its parental rights stuff sorted. I don't think that that's everybody's top priority, but it's going to play well politically with whom the Premier wants to play well politically right now, right? And for some people, it is relevant. For some people, they're going to say, well, finally, Alberta finally gets something on the books. And we're going to hear from a ton of people. You'll hear from some of them on this show, no doubt, when we know a little bit more about this, when we know the details. You'll hear from some people who say that people are going to say this is harmful legislation, and Alberta's taking this 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 steps in the wrong direction. You know, you saw the outcry in New Brunswick and Saskatchewan, and it's been suggested by people close to this that this is going to go even further. So whatever that means, we'll find out, and we'll welcome your feedback. No matter where you come at this from, we want to hear from you. To talk at ryanjesperson.com. We want our conversations to be meaningful, to be informed, and to be driven by people's real life lived perspective. So if we're talking directly to you like Saul last week, if you missed our flamethrower on Friday, I encourage you to check it out. How long was the flame? I noticed we hit the end of our music bed.
Yeah, it was long, like
the 9
band, minutes.
Like
yeah.
9 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about 9 minutes of people's responses to Tucker Carlson, to his visit to Alberta and Calgary and Edmonton, and some of you to my synopsis of it. I was there in Edmonton on Wednesday night when Tucker Carlson was here, and I let you know what I thought about it. If you want, you can check out the highlight video on our YouTube channel. I kind of give you basically my assessment of what struck me. Some of you thought that I was sort of cooing over and pandering to Tucker Carlson. Some of you thought that it was a left-wing or a communist analysis. One of you wrote in to say, which I thought was amazing. So I figured that we're walking the fine line there, that middle ground there with objective analysis. But Saul wrote in, and Saul's email, I mean, they were all great, but I think Saul's was probably the most powerful. Saul writes in as a trans man and says, here's why this bothers me, and here's why it's hard to hear. I mean, I still have Saul's email here with me because it's just, I don't know, sometimes Johnny knows. I'll leave some emails on the table long after we've read them just to kind of keep reminding us, just to kind of keep our perspectives focused. And Saul went on to basically say what it's like for me. He said, quote, the people, you know, for me, it's hard. When Tucker talks about how he's never met a trans person who was happy after undergoing, quote, gender mutilation, his genital mutilation, and that this elicited cheers from the audience, says Saul. This audience is made up of my fellow citizens, the people who live in the same city and province as I do, the people who go to work every day, maybe some with me as I work a blue-collar job, ordinary people who hold doors for others, striving to be good people like the rest of us. This scares me, says Says that people probably wouldn't even realize I'm trans. That from Saul. That was a very powerful email. So if we're speaking to you directly, we'd be honored if you'd take 5 minutes to let us know how you feel about this kind of stuff.
I don't think a happy trans person would ever walk up to Tucker Carlson and start discussing their private issues with him. But I agree with a lot of people on the chat. I think this is a non-issue the UCP are bringing up. Like, it is a form of affirming therapy to let kids, feel out, their life in school. Let them call themselves what they want. Let them, be whatever they want to be. And that's how they grow into themselves, their bodies, and figure out who they are. And this whole thing about, children are being mutilated, less than 1% of the population identifies as trans in the first place. And a small percentage of them can even go through all that stuff or afford all the aftercare and everything. So this whole thing, like, I was just reading an article here, registered nurse Robin Hodgson, she's the coordinator for transgender and non-binary program at London Health Centre. She says the amount of people who even ask for gender-affirming surgery under 18 is so small. It's very small. And any doctor, she says, I can tell you internationally, so all across the world, I do not know anybody, doctors, that are performing any type of genital surgery on anyone under the age of 18. So I think this is just it's a huge fear-mongering tactic. It's something to just blast in people's faces, and people seem to believe it. We've got people in our chat. I got friends of mine who used to be pretty liberal, left-wing in my view, who have kind of gone conservative, who are really worried about this. And I keep telling them, I'm like, this stuff is not happening at all. It's a non-issue.
If people want to learn a little bit more about this and like just kind of go to the straight facts on it and better understand, you're going to hear a lot about gender-affirming care.
Oh, we had that great show.
We did an episode on September 13th. I always want to remind people, like, these issues are on our radar. Something will flare up in news or politics, and you'll go, when are you going to talk about this, or what do you know about this? That's kind of the benefit of doing 5 shows a week and talking to the foremost experts in every field we can think of in the country, like Dr. Kate Greenaway, who basically kind of spelled out for us, for those of us that just like the average people that don't know everything about everything, in my mind, what was a very enlightening interview, what gender-affirming care is. And Dr. Greenaway at that point, so this is, again, September 13th, 2023, if you just search in our podcast or YouTube archives, the title is What is Gender-Affirming Care? That's the name of the episode. She kind of takes the sensationalism and the fear out of the conversation, although we ask her about that.
Yeah.
We obviously ask her about when politics and healthcare intersect. It feels like that's all we've been talking about for the last 4 years.
That's our show.
But she goes on and she just sort of like takes our questions. Some of them I remember saying to her, like, some of these the questions sound a little dumb or sound a little naive or sound a little elementary, but I really appreciated her availability in that interview. She's dedicated her entire career to gender-affirming care, and at that point was getting set to open the doors of Alberta's very first gender-affirming healthcare clinic. So you can learn more there September 13th, and maybe we'll
should definitely get her back.
You know what I'll do is, we're working on big roundtables. It's tough to talk about this in depth because we don't know what the legislation is yet, right? So we can have conversations like we have today, like what's the public likely to get outraged about? What is the public likely to shrug its shoulders at and maybe even quietly agree with, or at least, find itself willing, or able to align with, to say, well, maybe that kind of makes sense. Maybe this isn't all bad. What's outrageous? What's not? What's intuitive? What's probably influenced by special interest groups? What's good policy? I mean, to me, it says a lot. And you remember, governments of all stripes, and of course, across the political spectrum, love to throw mud at one another when it comes to consultation, right? Because the public doesn't like when a government fails to consult. Good policy requires, we must demand consultation with groups across the board, right? Groups that, if you want to have good environmental policy, you've got to talk to industry, and you got to talk to the environmental lobby. You've got to talk to scientists. I know I'm not saying anything especially crazy here, especially outrageous. I'm not really sticking my neck out there. So if you're talking about policies in schools, it makes sense to me that you would talk to, for example, the Alberta Teachers Association. And they right now say, to this point, they have not been consulted. So That's troubling. That's a bit of a red flag right out of the gates. You may ask the very simple question, who is influencing this government policy? And some people may draw their own conclusions, and in some circumstances, it may be very obvious to people that are driven by common sense. But that's another storyline that we'll be following. Those people that say that they have not been consulted to this point, what would be their advice? What would be the position that they would take if they had the ear of the education minister, the health minister, or the premier?
Yeah, I'm just worried about kids, and when I say kids, I mean anyone who's 18 and under, young people, what they think when they're hearing this. Because kids aren't dumb. They see the news on their phone just as much as we do. What are they thinking when they see that this stuff is being debated? Like you think it's hard for a gay or lesbian kid to come out. Oh my gosh. I mean, people say, well, the trans community is such a small population of the world. How do you know? I mean, that's so much scarier to tell someone these days, especially when you have these conversations happening, and you can see from our chat, you can see online under news stories, the comments. I mean, I would be deathly afraid if that was my position in life as a young person to even want to explore my sexuality at this point. I would honestly, and I'll say this for me only, I'm not talking about them, I would just hide everything until I was old enough to be on my own and do things as an adult, because it's just a very scary time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess everybody's different, and I try not to talk too much about walking miles when I've not worn shoes that have walked those miles.
We don't know what it's like.
But I would imagine that people that earlier in their life are able to sort of be public about their true selves would tell you, I would imagine in most circumstances, that is due in large part to support that they felt.
Yeah.
And to supports that they were able to tap into, whereas young people that perceive that they don't have those supports, and not just maybe don't have supports, but that it may go in the opposite direction. In other words, they may face hostility, or hatred, or in some circumstances even violence. Yeah. And then those are the people that obviously are on a journey that most people just can't even relate to. That's why this show, we'll say oftentimes, it's not our phrase, we've stolen it. We seek to understand.
And I want to say, I think that people are saying, well, children are being indoctrinated and all this. I don't think it's like that. I think it's not all doom and gloom. I think the reason we're seeing more people come into their own sexuality earlier is because we do talk about this now. You do see TV programs and news stories and articles and support across the board for the LGBTQ plus all that community, as well as trans people. So, I think it is a good time. It's not all doom and gloom, but at the same time, like I said, I would be scared to death to try and be myself in this day and age when you have stuff like Tucker Carlson coming to Edmonton and saying these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the Tucker thing, it's really interesting. We took our little guy to
it's the buzzwords I don't like. The mutilation, stuff like that.
Yeah, we took Wyatt to a hockey game this weekend and at Rogers Place, and there's a lot of people there, and that's where Tucker had been earlier in the week, and got stopped on the concourse a few times, and people come up and will always say, what did you really think of it? Like, what did you really think of it? I said,
recap.
I said, I talked about it for 20 minutes on the show. I told you everything I thought of. I missed some things. Like, I'm sure you forget some things as you're recalling and recapping an event. But people were curious to see, just because one thing you can't deny. A guy said to me this weekend, he said, one thing you can't deny is, like, every time he posts a video, it gets like 40 million views. He has a huge audience. You can't deny that. But I would also say, you talk to young people, or you see it, and you talk to young people in schools. There is the environments are, and someone can always come up with an example to counter this, okay? But for the most part, the environments are supportive. Kids just see things differently these days. And I even hear how my 8-year-old talks
100%.
About his friends. And there's many different circumstances I can think of. There's kids in his class or kids in his school that have where you can tell what religion their family follows based on what they're wearing, as an example. or kids from different ethnicities. There's 2 kids in Wyatt's class that are refugees from Ukraine. That comes with its own special challenges. There's a wonderful little boy in Wyatt's class. He's one of our, you don't pick favorites, but he's one of our favorites that has Down syndrome, and he's just an absolute delight. And like all of these kids, you know what? They honestly, and these are you're gonna. Some people may say, oh, they're 8, they're naive. These kids treat all the kids the same. They do, and it's like maybe real life hasn't polluted the dynamic of that group yet, and hopefully it never will. But it's a wonderful thing to see. There's the childlike innocence on one hand, but then there's also you know that these children are being taught about values that we as a society want to better reflect. But they're, like I said, and I choose that word on purpose, they're not yet polluted by a lot of the things that a lot of our perspectives are influenced by.
100%. And I think, again, it's not all doom and gloom. I think we're in the stages of a cultural revolution here, where in 10, 20, 30, 50 years, it's not going to matter what color you are, what gender you are, whatever. People are going to be free to be who they want to be. I'll tell a little story, 30 seconds here. I was at Walmart last night, and I'm in line, and I'm getting something, and my card wasn't working for some reason. So in the self-checkout, so I went to like the cash area, and there was a guy waiting in line, and another guy went to go where I went from the other side, and this like mid-30s white gentleman says to this guy who went where I was, who was, clearly, I don't know if he was brown or black, I'm not going to say, but he said, "Hey, there's a line here, bud." And I was like, oh, God, not on a Sunday at 8 p.m. And the guy looked up, and it was the way the guy said it to him. He was like, well, this one's open, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I didn't see it. And they get this. And behind me, a father's there with his young son. And the white guy says to the brown guy, he says, you guys all think you're entitled.
Oh, geez.
And the child behind me with his dad said really softly, but I heard him, Dad, what does he mean by that? And the father said, we'll talk about it in the car. Yeah. But the point is, like, kids don't see color or gender or any of that anymore, because things are becoming so much more freer now. So I do have good hope for, like, in the future. I think when we're older, we're gonna look at them and be like, man, they're all so accepting of each other. This is great. It's not a bad thing to let people be who they are.
Yeah, I like it. Well said. We welcome your feedback on this, as we do every single episode. And I love this. We have to wrap on Mondays. We wrap with positivity. Although I think that what you just said was pretty positive.
It today.
Well, I think there's been a lot of positivity here. That's why I never want, I know last week we talked about a lot of things that, the shooting at Edmonton City Hall, like what the hell, right? Geez, that comes out of nowhere. And the Tucker Carlson show, and there, all these other things are going on. And I know that, the World Juniors, the London police demanding that these 5 men surrender to police to face charges, and there's like heavy stories, and some of you wrote in just to say, I hope you have some lighthearted stuff, I hope you have some fun stuff. And so number one, Friday's Real Talk Roundtable is all about how you can save money on your energy costs. I thought that was pretty good, but also just a reminder that we can grapple with and tackle and discuss heavy subject matter and still come out of it encouraged. And that's our goal when we're producing these shows, and I hope that it's our goal as well as a community here, that we find the focus at the end of that conversation to say, okay, where are we directing our energy? Like, where does our energy need to be directed to ensure that these challenging circumstances, if not see positive outcomes, at least allow us to find a perspective that we can continue to operate through our day without these dark clouds over us. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes real life is exactly that. It's real, but oftentimes, and more often than not, communities like these, where we can have real conversations, I think, give us an incredible tool to navigate that life. And we're grateful, the first episode of every week, for the partnership of our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy, who require us to wrap the episode on something positive, to get rid of that negativity, and to basically take a look at a story, a circumstance that harnesses positive energy, renews our faith in humanity. And this is an incredible one. And this was passed along by Lindsey. And Lindsey, we sure thank you. She emailed this in just a few days ago. She said, I saw this online and I had to share with you. This guy named Chris Blaze. He went to buy a Samsung washer and dryer. He posted this on his social media, buying it privately, Kijiji or what have you, from a guy who was asking $500 for this washer dryer combo, right? And he said, says Chris, I told the guy that I had just had a kid. We had just had a baby. And if he would be able to take $400 for the pair instead of $500, I'd be really grateful. And so I got home and I hooked everything up. And he's got these like really, really nice washer dryers. You know those front load Samsung ones, Johnny?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody wants those ones,
Beautiful.
right? He says, I opened them up and everything was working great. And I opened up the dryer to check the lint filter. And there was my $400 sitting in the dryer. And there was a message from him after I got home. He texted me and it said, check the dryer. It's our gift for your new baby. Chris says, words cannot describe how grateful I am right now. I feel so blessed. I just had to share a big shout out to this man, David. Thank you so much. So David, we don't know who you are. David, we hope that the universe somehow puts this positive reflection in your lap, and so you know that thousands and thousands and thousands of people are going to be blessed today by your generosity. But no one more blessed than Chris and his family, including their brand new baby. Lindsay, thank you for sharing your positive reflections. You can do what Lindsay did by sending us an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Just put positive reflections in the subject line, or you can hit us up on any of our social media channels. You'll find us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok @RealTalkRJ. Positive Reflections is powered by Kuby Renewable Energy. You can get your free solar quote today at kubyenergy.ca. We've got a big week in store, friends. We'll meet you right back here on Tuesday, 8:30 Mountain Time, live streaming on YouTube and the Mixler audio app, presented by our friends at California Closets, or anytime on demand on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Be well, friends. One love.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive